Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to DC Inno on Fire. We'll start in a couple of seconds, so please hang tight. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the annual DC Inno on Fire celebration. I'm Alex Orfinger, and I'm the market president and publisher of the Washington Business Journal, a sister publication of DC Inno. As you'd imagine, this event was originally scheduled to be in person. Unfortunately, and for obvious reasons, that was not possible this year. Despite our inability to be in the same room together, we knew it was important to celebrate those who are driving innovation in the Washington metro area and beyond. We're excited to be here virtually with you today, and we're thrilled to introduce you to our 2020 Fire honorees. This year's honorees range in size, in industry, in age, and in stage. They're all having their moments in different ways. There's sizzling with new fundings and rising revenue on the heels of entries and exits and all sorts of pivots during a particularly and profoundly difficult period. COVID-19 challenged these very ventures, threatened their futures, and made growth that much harder. For some, the pandemic created great opportunity, and for others, it issued a major test that these players today have passed. We hope you enjoy Inno on Fire as an opportunity to look back on what these amazing people, organizations, and startups have accomplished over the last year, and the chance to look forward to the projects and endeavors they are working on in the future. I want to thank our sponsors, without whom this event would not be possible. They have all stuck with us through these extraordinarily difficult times and really helped us to pivot to this virtual event tonight. Thank you to our Silver Fire sponsor, Poppin, and to our Fire ecosystem supporters, Research Innovations, and Maggio Cato. Now, thank you to all three of them. Now, some of you may be wondering why I'm here kicking off Fire tonight. And in a couple of weeks, DC Inno will integrate more deeply and fully with the Washington Business Journal. DC Inno will still be the same Inno you've come to know and love, and will remain the very best way for you to stay on top of startup, tech, and innovation news. But moving forward, DC Inno will work more closely with the Washington Business Journal in an effort to help unite leaders of today with the rising leaders and businesses of tomorrow. I'd like to introduce Sarah Kilgore, staff reporter of DC Inno. I hope you've gotten to know her from her twice-a-week Beat newsletter. So please welcome Sarah, and let's get this virtual event heated up. Thank you.
Alex, thank you so much for the introduction, and hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you all today. As Alex said, I'm Sarah Kilgore. I've been running DC Inno, and I'm also the innovation and healthcare reporter for the Washington Business Journal. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Before we light the fire, for anyone unfamiliar with us and what we do, just to give you a bit of background, Inno is part of a growing network of sites. We're currently in 14 markets, and we cover and connect local tech, startups, growth, and innovation. DC Inno has been reporting on the greater Washington ecosystem since 2012, and we do that through news stories, startup and founder profiles, our twice-a-week newsletter that I think a lot of you get called The Beat, quarterly events, which are virtual for now, as you know, as is this one, and a lot more. You can check us out at dcinno.com to see what we're all about and sign up for The Beat, which is really the best way to stay plugged into everything that's impacting the local innovation economy. It's fun, it's conversational, and it's packed with local news on this ecosystem. And then we also keep you in the loop on upcoming events and job openings and more. So before we get into our annual Fire winner video and the big blazer reveal, I just want to give you a little more info on what Inno on Fire actually is and why we're all here. In the past 8 years since DC Inno's official debut, we've worked to showcase the people, companies, and trends that are helping to transform this region into a burgeoning innovation and startup hub. And today marks a celebration of the early stage businesses, enterprises, and innovators who are doing the work to set the ecosystem ablaze. So to find our 2020 class of Fire winners, we asked our audience to submit their nominations to us. We sourced our own networks and coverage, and from that kind of giant master list, we identified the Inno on Fire winners, and this afternoon we will honor them. We will also unveil the Inno Blazers, which are the top companies or people or organizations trailblazing new paths and blazing the brightest, if you will, in each category. The Inno Blazers were selected by an esteemed panel of judges and really just stand out in the innovation community overall. Our 2020 judges were Tommy White, Interim Director of American University's Center for Innovation at the Kogut School of Business, Shahir Ramen, Senior Regional Partnership Specialist with General Assembly, Erin Fristow, Director of Talent and Community Engagement with Research Innovations, Jonathan Aberman, Dean of Marymount University School of Business and Technology, David Lang, Program Manager of Georgetown University's Entrepreneurship Initiative in the McDonough School of Business, Vandana Sinha, Editor-in-Chief of the Washington Business Journal, Andy Medici, Money and Tech Reporter for the Washington Business Journal, and myself. So with that, it's time to celebrate our winners and reveal to you this year's Inno Blazers. Get ready to cheer and be sure to tweet us your celebration pics afterwards. Now let's roll the Inno on Fire winner video. So if you didn't catch all of them out of those 50 winners, this year's Inno Blazers once again are Sorcero, Novavax, Anacostia Organics, Halcyon, Somatis, Parabon Nanolabs, Flikshop, IonQ, and Seth Goldman with Eat the Change. And with that, we're going to jump right into our panel, actually featuring 3 of our Blazers. I don't know if they're coming, but I think so. So yeah, we'll all be coming on. I can introduce them in the meantime. Joining us today, we have Kate Goodall, co-founder and CEO of Halcyon, Marcus Bullock, founder and CEO of Flikshop, and Seth Goldman, founder of Honest Tea and now Eat the Change. And I think the audience is pretty familiar with the 3 of you, but wanted to thank you again so much for being here. And to kick it off, let's just have each of you introduce yourself, share a bit about what you're doing now. And Kate, if you don't mind, we can start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, this panel now makes a lot more sense. But I'm also just really grateful for DC Inno and for the award, and particularly given that all of the other nominees, certainly in our category, were equally deserving. So thank you so much for that. Yeah, Halcyon has been around for over 7 years now, and we started, as most people know, with an incubator to find the best social enterprises from around the world. And since then, we've kind of just added year over year, program after program, to create space and build the right ecosystem for those entrepreneurs to really be the most successful that they can, including most recently an intensive for specifically DC entrepreneurs from DC's opportunity zones, and just recently we launched an angel investment network that is for the best social enterprises from around the country. And we just did our first round of funding in 2 companies, one of which was a Halcyon venture and one was not, for a total of $670,000. So we're just really excited not just to be doing this work, but to be seeing like an amazing response from the community, particularly around social impact investing and providing the tools and the capital that are needed. So thank you.
Great. Marcus, do you want to go next?
You know, so I'm with you, Kate. The panel makes so much more sense now, but so honored to be able to be a part of this list. You know, you're going to have to excuse my constant. I'm always smiling, but I'm super pumped about this. And in fact, I'm one of the fellows that just graduated out of one of the last cohorts over at Halcyon, and I'm so grateful to be able to be here to be on this panel talk tonight. I'm the CEO and founder of Flikshop. We built the technology that helps families stay connected to their incarcerated loved ones using micro doses of love in the form of postcards. So we're excited to be able to be one of the ones that bring this level of innovation into this community, and grateful to be amongst this list of incredible honors.
Seth, you're up.
Hey there, great to be with everybody, and love this kind of conversation around innovation and impact. So I just finished my time with Honest Tea at the end of last year, and have transitioned now to create 2 new roles. One is a co-founder of Plant Burger. That's the logo behind me, and it's both a planet and a burger, which I love. And then we're launching a new brand called Eat the Change, which will hit the store shelves in January of next year. And until we hit the store shelves, it's really an activist brand. We just this week announced our 2nd wave of grants we're giving out this year, about $1/3 $350,000 to nonprofits around the country focused on connecting consumers to planet-friendly diets. So, you know, activism and commercial enterprise are really, for me, 2 sides of the same coin. And to this year, the activism was what led our actions.
Great, and thank you all so much for that background. I think that's a great place to kind of pick up, which is just kind of recognizing in different ways you've all had really big growth, success, change this year, especially. And Marcus, maybe you can start us off with this question. Let's talk about what your plan was at the beginning of 2020, and then recognizing that maybe you need to adjust to the changes that were happening and adjust your business plan. How did you pivot and navigate that change?
I mean, so, you know, like I described earlier, I mean, we built a direct-to-consumer product that allows for family members who don't have the opportunity to be able to leverage the internet that you and I use every day, whether it be through Facebook or Instagram or any of the ways that you and I connect with our family members. The millions of people around the globe are missing that because of the security restrictions that prohibit the internet from being there. And so with our technology allowing us to be able to connect those families in a meaningful way, we were able to see some really, really great traction in and out last year in November, where we opened up our seed round. And while we were celebrating some great month-over-month growth around about 30% into raising that round, we knew we had a follow-on tranche that was going to happen at the promise of March. And then March happened. And I had just hired a team. We were just getting started to gain that traction together. But we had to make a huge pivot and build not only the direct-to-consumer product, but a duct tape version of our enterprise software that wasn't planned to get released until January of next year. But it's allowed us to be able to continue growth and to build a strong revenue source for our business between these two different marketplaces.
And as you mentioned, you've gone through one of Halcyon's programs. Kate, you work with a ton of companies. What have you seen in the way of, I guess, what's been required to adjust and to kind of move through this moment?
Yeah, I mean, tenacity, but that goes without saying it at any time, right? Like, I think that this year has maybe across the board just magnified everything that's always required to create a successful social enterprise or business, for that matter. I mean, you've got to be able to show revenue despite COVID, and you know, I think a lot of companies are staying afloat right now because they were smart. They cut costs. They you know, they managed to make some smart pivots. You know, Marcus is an amazing example of someone who you know, was able to sort of use the crisis in a really smart way, because obviously incarcerated populations were in many cases shut down. You couldn't access them as easily for visitation, and Marcus provides a solution that's a ready-made fit for that. But it doesn't come like easily, right? Like, Marcus had to change all sorts of things in order to provide for that. Similarly, we've got another really great example of you know, a Halcyon fellow that sort of just had that tenacity and made some smart choices. Is Shavini with Oxyware, who has a oxygen monitoring device prototype for a problem, pulmonary hypertension, that she suffers, right? And it was something she's been working on in prototype for a long time, but it turns out that obviously during COVID, knowing how much oxygen you have in your blood is a really necessary thing, and so she's just ramped up much faster than she thought she could. But no one would be able to do that without that kind of real, just tenacious, dogged thing that we see in the most successful entrepreneurs. And I feel like that's a great segue to Seth.
I feel that way too.
So for us, yeah, the plant burger, we were thinking about, should we try to go our own brick and mortar? And when we realized all these restaurants are getting shut down, but Whole Foods is still open, we said, well, we're housing Whole Foods, let's just keep going. And as a result, we've opened 4 more. We've got 1 more restaurant we're opening up this month. So you know, that's an aggressive growth rate at any time, let alone, you know, at a time when most restaurants are closing. And then with the brand, Eat the Change, we just looked at what was going on in stores and with buyers. We said, this is not the year to launch a new food brand, because buyers are just focused on keeping their shelves full, and you can't do any marketing, any trial in the store. And so we said, let's amplify our activism, let's show what we stand for, and lay the groundwork to launch early next year, where I think, you know, even though obviously we don't expect coronavirus will be gone, but we do think people will be ready for something fresh. And to me, it really reinforced our brand name, Eat the Change. I think it made it all the more relevant, because I think consumers are ready to take more activism into their hands and into their mouths, and, you know, make dietary choices that align with their concerns.
Mm-hmm. And with that, Seth, we can start with you on this. What is the biggest lesson you've learned this year? I know you've been in startup world a long time, right? I know Honest TDU is still a startup, even though some might argue otherwise. But what would you say is the biggest thing that you've taken away from this?
You know, I think it's some of what Kate said. Like, you know, tenacity is like, you need it no matter what the circumstances are. So, like, for me, yes, this year is challenging, but you know, and I'm sure Marcus knows it, starting up a company under any scenario is challenging. And so this is just like an extra wrinkle. It really is. I mean, I'm not trying to trivialize it, but you just got to be ready for everything thrown your way, and because everything is thrown your way. And so we just roll with it. It's funny. I mentioned one of the interesting things I just started to experience earlier this month was like this tension in my back, sort of upper shoulder. And I realized I hadn't felt that tension in about 20 years. It was, you know, when I was starting Honesty, I felt that same thing. And that's just comes with the territory of, you know, trying to build something from scratch. And of course, it would be ideal if I didn't have that pain, but I kind of feel like it's refreshing to be back into that mode.
Marcus, how about you? What have you learned this year?
You know, I think the biggest thing is, you know, trying to figure out how to do more faster, and especially, you know, while onboarding a team, right? Like that was the big thing for us. We had to learn how to build systems, watching those systems fail, right? That's hard, right? The business has to continue to keep growing. The system has to continue to, you know, you have to figure out how to be able to build. We were building new software, you know, going from a product that was centered around a direct-to-consumer, you know, audience, and then learning how to be able to build B2B software and learning how to articulate that value prop to a brand new customer, and then onboarding a team through that. Those are some challenges, you know, that you're facing, especially during times of pivot. But I think that's what, you know, going back to Kate's, you know, point about around resilience is like that tenacity, that tenacious spirit. That's what it has to show up, and, you know, forcing yourself to get out of bed and be creative every day and try to figure out a way to turn a blinking cursor on the screen into something magical. But you know, it's fun, and I'm enjoying that part of the journey.
What have been, and I think you've all touched on this, but if you had to kind of like focus on one challenge that you're either still navigating this year, or even that you've already kind of overcome, what do you think of, and what was that like? What has it been like kind of navigating this period with that on your list?
I'll take a crack at that. I mean, for us, you know, the marketing I've done for the past 20 years has always been that authentic hand-to-mouth marketing, interacting with people, whether it's giving out a sample cup or just being able to share personal enthusiasm. And so, you know, we're literally, not only are we cut off from interacting with each other, our faces are cut off. So you can't even really, you know, sort of through a smile or through facial gestures, really spread the enthusiasm of what you have. And so that's an interesting evolution, and I don't think I don't think that's going to change in the next 6 months. So we have to think about how do we still create and how do we communicate authentic passion for what we're doing without that traditional tool.
So can I double down on that? Like, I think it's been so interesting. The majority of the latter part of my career has been centered around moving around the country and help changing the narrative around what it's like to either employ or work with or invest or partner with people that have a criminal background. I went to prison when I was a 15-year-old kid for stealing a car from someone and got sentenced to 8 years in adult maximum securities. I grew up as a kid growing up in prisons through my teenage years and early 20s, trying to figure out how to navigate that space. And then coming home and being able to start a business was challenging. I mean, it's hard for anybody, right? Like,
right.
You graduate from Wharton Business School, you know, it's still challenging with all the money in the world. It's still challenging to be able to start businesses and then be able to help grow them. But being able to be bold enough to want to go out and share the story with the world allowed me to be able to not only be able to build a presence and a brand for our company, but begin to change the dinner table conversations around the country. Not having that opportunity to be able to share that kind of branding or messaging has been interesting, and as we learned about how to maintain that sense of authenticity, whether through our social channels, the relationships that we have with our existing customers, finding interesting ways to reconnect with them where they would typically see us in one of the corners of their neighborhoods. We don't have that luxury any longer. And so I think that's going to be an interesting challenge going forward.
Mm-hmm.
And ours is slightly different. You know, as many people know, Halcyon has a very unique program in a few ways. One, you know, it's residential, so you actually live there with a cohort of 7 other companies, and we select them from sort of 500 applications every time. So it's a really, really high touch program, and it's success is 100% incumbent on its community, which we usually have relied upon being in person to build and sustain. And you know, there's lots of words that we have for the je ne sais quoi magic that happens when you have these great entrepreneurs helping each other, and all of the people that advise and invest and everything that make up the rest of that community, our board, our team, and one of them is like this facilitated serendipity, this idea that if you just put really smart, well-intentioned people in a room together, that greatness comes out of it, and you can't do that. So, you know, we've really had to work very hard to figure out ways to kind of both reproduce some of that with some really high quality virtual programming, but also accept what we can't change in some ways, and figure out what the other strengths of this moment are for us, which certainly is that we can fit a lot more people in a virtual event than we can in a brick and mortar event. So, you know, we've focused a lot on how do we create sort of like massive, great virtual event programming.
And I think that is a good point, just the fact that everyone has had to figure out kind of how to change these things we've been doing certain ways for so long. And I think one question, Kate, I know we talked about this over time in terms of what is still needed to support founders in general, let alone right now, especially diverse founders, amid efforts to foster equity in the ecosystem, to promote equal access to capital when we know that right now that doesn't exist. So I'm curious, kind of in considering the landscape and the fact that there is some work to be done, what do you see as kind of being top priority to continue supporting founders?
Yeah, so, you know, this is an area that Halcyon's heavily invested in, you know, both because we, you know, are interested in social impact companies, and, you know, this is at its core, social impact is increasing opportunity for everyone, but also because our founders tend towards, you know, 52% of our founders are women, and 63% are founders of color, and we've seen firsthand how harder it is, how many more hurdles they have to climb to get funding, to get capital, whatever mechanism it is. And we know, if you look at any stats, you know, that you know, 6% of venture capital, I think in 2016, went to women, and 1% went to Black men, and a de minimis amount, like 0.0001, went to Black women. And that number, unfortunately, has gone down since 2016. And there's a number of reasons for that, not the least of which is implicit bias and how many questions that those types of founders get about risk as opposed to opportunity in any given room, even rooms run by women and Black people. So it's a really complicated issue, but what we're working on day in and day out at Halcyon is ways to reduce that friction cost, because ultimately, you know, if you are a woman or you're Black or you're just any sort of, you know, marginalized, from any marginalized group, and you're trying to start a business, you are, it's going to cost you more in energy and time and money to get to the same place, right? So there's lots of things that we can all do, and I think the good news is that now more people see that, more people accept it. I think there's no way after this year and the spotlights that this year has given us collectively, and we can look at that as a gift if we want to turn it around on its head. You know, that there's no way that people can really in mass ignore that anymore. And so I'm really confident that is going to hopefully start to head in the right direction.
Another question, which is kind of broad, but looking ahead, as we mentioned, we're in a time of unbelievable change. What do you all think, and anyone feel free to take this, what are the next industries of the future that either are not really dominant yet, or maybe don't exist, or are starting to emerge, that you see kind of, you know, exploding going forward?
You know, I'll jump in there. I think, I mean, this one of the places that I think that, you know, I'm really interested in, and just I'm tinkering around with, and in those moments, you know, when I'm in the car with the kids, is around voice. I'm excited about what's happening with voice, and how we're going to be leveraging that with all of our IoT devices. You know, what's happening, you know, all of our wearables. And even now, as we think about how our children are learning, I think it's going to be very, very interesting to think about how they're going to be interacting and engaging in voice technology and augmented realities. I think that the classrooms are going to forever change. And so one of the places where, I'm finding a lot of interest watching my 9-year-old and my 4-year-old is how they engage with the Comcast remote and telling it what to do and what that's going to evolve to look like.
I see continued growth around the shift from animal-based diets to plant-based diets. I think we're really, even though it seems relatively big compared to where it was, we're just at the very beginning of this. And I was recently in Whole Foods and noted that 50% of their dairy case is plant-based. And if you can imagine that kind of transformation happening, I mean, obviously that's early. Whole Foods is an innovator, but usually they lead the way. And if you can imagine, certainly by the time our children or grandchildren are growing up, that 50% or more of the food offerings where they had been animal-based will be plant-based. That's a pretty profound transformation. A lot of growth to come.
I would tend to agree with Seth in an even more macro way, right? Like when Halcyon started back in 2014, we were still at the time when social impact was a dirty word, or impact investing, right? And everyone thought if you did that it was returns would be concessionary. I can't tell you the amount of times I was basically laughed at. and then we saw like a gradual shift, right? Starting in 2017 with Exxon being kind of taken into account by its shareholders, and it sort of started to do this a little bit. And I consider 2020 the mass adoption year, right? Like we are now going to be investing in the things that we want to see in the world rather than continuing the status quo investments and hoping that it'll change. And we know that those investments will make money in the long run because we've all seen it with things like Honest Tea and Beyond Meat, right? So, I think that particularly with the generations that, we see on the streets right now, those are the generations that have the wallets going forward. And if you are not, if you don't have a values aligned company, if you're not intentionally creating impact, you're going to be the losers, in the decades to come. And I am super excited about that.
Well, and with that, what differences, if any, are you all seeing in how investors are approaching their investment decisions? Are they starting to think differently about really everything, industry, company, whatever?
Yeah, I think we made a big breakthrough this year where I think social justice had and Black Lives Matter, all that that kind of discussion had been marginalized and not taken. Sort of said, well, that's for the activists. And I think it really crossed over so that people understand, no, this is about the way we live, the way we interact with each other, and it has to be on the agenda of every corporation. It has to be something companies don't relegate to your PR department. It has to be about how you hire, who you hire. Who you contract with, who you work with on the supply side, and to me that's a big change, and I certainly hope a lasting one. But I think I think once you cross over into that, putting it that much in the middle of the agenda, I don't think you can go back. I don't think you sort of gets relegated back into some PR department.
And I think we've got enough data now to make the economic case too, right, for all of this in terms of, diverse teams build a better product. If diverse teams create better retention, diverse teams, create higher profits. It's just, all of that is true. And we've also got this big looming crisis to solve, let's not forget, around climate change.
Yeah, for sure.
So, and I can tell you the Angel Investment Network was that we launched, that I mentioned, we over 600,000 in 2 investments just out of the gate, and we didn't have to sit there and convince everyone that these impact investments were a good idea. The angels were there, they were on board. Like the investors are there now. So I just really want everyone to know that, because I feel like that's good news, and we all need good news in 2020.
Yeah, and I think we always want good news, but especially now. It looks like we have time for one more question, and then we'll see if we have any questions from the audience. So if anyone wants to submit questions, please do, and we can get to those soon. But for each of you, what is the biggest piece of advice you have for entrepreneurs right now? If you could tell them one thing, leave them with one message today, what would it be? Marcus,
I always say, you know, just accept that you don't control anything, as hard as it is, and you just, you know, you keep forward to your vision. There's a
Especially these days.
bit of a imaginary fear monster that everyone has behind you at all times, and you can turn around and look at it if you want to, but it doesn't do you any good, so don't look at it.
I would say, don't pay attention to everyone else to the left and the right of you. Like, none of us know what we're doing. We're all trying to figure it out. Like, every single day, we're waking up in the morning like, I have no idea what I'm doing today, but I guarantee you we're going to work hard to try to figure it out. And we have a team on board that has a strategy, and a mission, and a list of executables, right? It's in literally in that order. And I think that if you remember that we all are figuring it out, it'll take a lot of the pressure off of you and allow you to be able to leverage your passion to go out and build.
I'm not going to get it exactly right, but there was an Honesty bottle cap quote that had something to the effect of, it's not the mountain that bothers you, it's the pebble in your shoe. And so it means, you know, too often entrepreneurs get distracted by the pebble in the shoe. It's like, don't worry about the pebble in the shoe, you know, scale the mountain and let all that other stuff, you know, just find a way. You just shake that out of your shoe, keep going.
I'm not seeing any questions yet, so that means I can ask you all more. But again, audience, if you want to send anything, these guys will answer your questions. I would love to know how you all have been spending your time during quarantine when you're not working, to de-stress, to get away from work, even though I know that's impossible. How have you kind of taken a step away?
I'll go first. One thing that my wife and I have discovered is birding at a much deeper level. So we used to just sort of admire birds in the backyard and stuff, but turns out we got a guide and went down to the Potomac, just a book, and found all these incredible bird species that have obviously always been here. We just hadn't appreciated it. And it was a great way to sort of recognize how amazing things are all around you, but you don't always pay attention to them. And so we've seen things like indigo buntings and red-headed woodpeckers, stuff that like I had only read about in books. And so it was kind of a mind shift to realize they've always been here. We just never saw them before.
One of the things that I've been doing, I've been really enjoying. So we just bought a dog for our children for Christmas this past year. And I'm enjoying taking our dog out for much longer walks that have now turned into me going out for runs now. And now, like, I'm like addicted to going out and running every day. And so some of the collateral benefits of that is, like, since COVID, I've lost 30 pounds since I started running every day. And interesting also, when I'm running, I have my headphones on and I'm able to listen to audiobooks. Like, I've read like 5 books every month since I've started running, and it's incredible. It's amazing.
So there's 2 camps during COVID, the camp that are like losing weight and the camp that are gaining weight. So congratulations, Marcus. I knew you looked good. I'm in the camp that's gaining weight. So I'll have to borrow from your habit. But I've been enjoying a few things, like silver linings, right? Like, I've had more time with my children than I've ever had. I'm sure that's true for both of you. And that's been wonderful. And then the things that I never thought I'd have time to do while I was still in like career mode, growing a vegetable garden and just cooking more, and really like kind of relishing both of those things. And I think it's the cooking more that's the problem. But there's been some silver linings for sure.
Great. And I know you've all had, you know, a lot of different experiences leading up to what you're all doing now. Can you just talk, each of you, a bit about, I guess, what you've taken into your current work from your past experiences? So Seth, I know honesty was a big part of your life for a long time, and Beyond Meat as well, and now you're on to something new. So if you could just talk a bit about, you know, how you kind of think about that experience and what you're doing.
Yeah, you know, in a sense, it's almost, there's not a downside, but, you know, I will say that I've almost gotten spoiled because now I reach out to buyers. Back in Honest Tea days, I was hounding buyers, trying to get their attention, trying to get them to return my calls, to get an appointment. And just today I sent an email to the CEO of a major chain, and he emailed me right back. So it's like a different level. But my worry there is that if things come too easily, you don't get challenged the way you need to be challenged as an entrepreneur. So in a sense, now my risk, I don't want to say it's complacency, but it's not keeping that fire. Like an entrepreneur should never get used to the idea that things come easily. That's not the right mindset. It's not the right culture. You always have to be that challenger. You always have to feel like and I'm sure once our product hits the market, we still will have that, but it's just an interesting evolution. But the good news is 20 years of being in this industry, starting to, I'm realizing some benefits of it, but I just have to always be conscious that I'm starting with nothing as a business. We have no presence, so we have to have that challenger mindset.
Marcus, what about you? How have you, I guess, as you've grown Flikshop over the years, and now you're really growing fast, as you said you've had to, what have you sort of taken from, the pre-Flikshop days?
Yeah, one of the things that I really enjoyed so before Flikshop, I ran a painting business that grew into a construction firm. And one of the things that, you learn very swiftly is how important it is to be able to be, no matter what kind of business you own, is to be amongst the community. And so because we were building a small business that was a painting business, and we learned, we're like, how do we scale this thing? How do we grow this painting business? And so we learned one of the ways that we did is in the very, very early stages of growing that one was figuring out a way to get the Boys and Girls Club contract to paint the exterior of that building, and then learn what the community really, really needed when they were suffering from what they thought was like a transformed DC that was being in a conversation about gentrification and how folks were getting pushed out. And it was like, well, how do we create a community amongst one another? Like, how do we become one of the bonds of the glue? Because this isn't a horrible thing that's happening to our beautiful city. And so learning how to create those kinds of bonds, it's not just, we aren't just here to, reply to RFPs and ITBs and RFQs, right? We have to get out the office and go learn how to be able to build community. And it's one of the things that transferred over to Flikshop. So when we were building software, where it's very, very easy to get, stuck inside of your office and try to figure out ways to build beautiful technology, you lose the relationships that you build with some of either the customers, the investors, even just the advocates and the supporters of the cause of the mission of the organization. And so, I'm excited to know that that's one of the big, the foundational principles of how we think about building our company, is like building it alongside of the community.
Kate, did you want to speak to this at all? Pre-Halcyon?
Yeah, my career makes no sense. I did my graduate work as a maritime archaeologist, so I did a lot of scuba diving on shipwrecks, and I guess a couple of notable things there that perhaps shaped me in interesting ways were one, you mix technology and deep diving, and it's a very male-dominated field, so that definitely like stuck in my head a little bit, and also just really undergoing that kind of training that is needed to be able to do that well. It's a little bit kind of Army Ranger level, and they teach you a lot about how to not let your amygdala flare take over and hijack you. And I constantly, like, that doesn't go away. That's muscle memory, and it's exceptionally useful in terms of when we are facing a challenge to go back to kind of the basics of, okay, breathe. All right, you're breathing. Okay, now what? Right? Like just calmly kind of like separating yourself from the problem. And it is something I use all the time, despite it seemingly being unrelated.
No, that's great advice. I need to hear that probably daily. So I guess it looks like the last question I will ask you guys, and Seth, you can start with this. What is your top priority for the rest of this year and heading into 2021?
Well, for Eat the Change, so we've got a product prototype, and now we're going after retailers, just starting to pitch it to them and getting ready to launch. And so building out the team, making sure that we'll have a way to market this product despite the environment we're dealing with. And you know, these are this is I will say the best antidote to what's going on in the world is creating and building something new. And so I'm really enjoying that.
Who wants to go next?
Go ahead, Marcus.
Sure. One of the places where we're focusing on, as you know, we continue to close out this year and in early part of next year, is that, you know, we want to work with the organizations, the businesses that want to figure out ways to be able to help increase their social impact footprint. A lot of the conversations that were built around the racial tension that we've seen in the country have resulted in a lot of the commitments that have been happening between some of these corporations that really do want to figure out how they can involve or engage either with their dollars or with their teams, and then they don't even know how to do it, but they know that they want to be able to figure out what that looks like, because we have figured out ways to be able to connect directly with a lot of the families and the people that are incarcerated. We're learning about ways that we can create this bridge between the community and folks who need the resources and support more than anyone else. And so those organizations and companies that want to figure out how to be able to build these kinds of inclusive policies in their companies, we want to be able to help support that. And so I'm excited about you know, building those kinds of relationships as we, you know, continue out this summer and the year.
And we're just doubling down on a lot of things. Certainly the, you know, our opportunity intensive went really well this year. It's not even over yet, but we already know that we want to repeat that, and if possible for more people. And we're also looking at other ways that we can just continue to serve a lot more entrepreneurs. Certainly this virtual test has fed us with some ideas there. So, you know, we're not stopping.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for being here and taking the time to talk with us. I really appreciate it. I know our audience does too. So I think that ends our panel. And also thank you again to the audience for being here today, and congratulations to all of the Inno on Fire winners and the Blazer winners, including our panelists. You can learn more about all of them at dcinno.com. And one last thing to wrap it up, the Inno chain has been ramping up expansion, and that's because the more markets we're in, the better we can serve our audience. So for instance, if you're a logistics company, Inno can connect you to the logistics focused VC firm in Richmond or Atlanta or Chicago. Or if you're working on blockchain here, Inno can hook you up with the blockchain accelerator in Boston or Austin or Tampa Bay. So beyond telling stories and hosting events, we're also in the business of making connections. So with that, please reach out if there's ever anyone local or in one of our other markets that you'd like to meet or learn more about, and we'll do our best to make that connection. And like any growth company, we rely on feedback to get better. So as I always tell everyone I talk to, if there's anything you want to see more of or less of, please let us know, and feel free to reach out to me anytime. So to wrap it up, a big final thank you to our event sponsors, Poppin, Maggio Cater, and Research Innovations. Check them out and all the ways they're supporting the community. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
See you.
Yes.